And we're live, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody. Good to see you. Maybe for the last time in this term of office. Right, can I start with apologies? Do we have any?
Yes, Chair. So we've had apologies from Councillor Giles, Councillor Clark, Councillor Thomas, Councillor Chris Evans and Leanne. I do believe that Councillor Townsend is present, but she's trying to get back into the meeting now.
Right. We are call it to proceed.
Yes, that's fine, Chair.
Yeah, okay then. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Okay. And should we go on to see the minutes of the last meeting? Which I believe are on pages 3 to 10 if you have the minutes in front of you. We're all content, say, with page 3?
So, Chair, are you looking for accuracy or are you doing matters arising at the same time?
I was looking for accuracy. I'll do matters arising at the end, yeah? Okay. Okay. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. And page 10. So I suppose we can conclude that we're all content with the accuracy of the minutes. Yeah. No matters arising, Matthew. Was there anything that struck out, and anybody else? Is there anything you want as regards matters arising?
Yeah, just on page 3, Chair, the first page of the minutes. The last meeting I brought up the issue of the petition schemes, and we just received the advice from Welsh Government. And it does say we'll receive a more detailed report on the options in the March meeting. Don't know whether we could have perhaps an oral update of any future information we've received from the Welsh Government.
We'll pick that up on the next item, Chair, under the participation strategy. Just to confirm, we haven't had any further update in terms of the guidance. What we shared last time was the draft guidance. So we're still awaiting that final guidance. We understand that won't be available until after the elections. So the consultation period doesn't end until sometime in May. So we proceeded on the basis of the draft guidance, but we'll update you verbally on the next item in terms of the participation strategy, which includes the petition scheme.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Anybody else on matters arising, or are we all content to proceed on? Yeah. Right. Okay. Okay. So that brings us on to point 4 on my list. It's participation strategy consultation update.
Well, firstly, Chair, in terms of the participation strategies, as you know, we've been at the public consultation on the draft strategy that you approved as a committee. I think the consultation is due to end at the end of March. Leanne gave me a brief update yesterday in terms of the response to the public consultation. I think suffice it to say it's been limited, to say the least. I think we've had only about 13 or 14 responses to that via the web page. And in terms of the strategy itself, I don't think there were any comments in terms of what was in the strategy. The comments that were received were more about criticism in terms of the council not listening to public concerns and how the council responds to those issues. There was some comments also online about the accessibility of the website, the council website, which obviously we are looking at the moment in terms of improving public access to the website, and some comments about the need for an explanation as to how the council's governance processes work. Well, as you know, as a committee, that's a requirement of the legislation, and we're working on that guide to the Constitution anyway. So hopefully we can address those issues as part of the review of the Constitution. But in terms of the draft strategy, there were no comments on that in terms of what was included. I think the concerns are more about the implementation of the strategy. and how the council puts that into practice. And again, it's a conversation we've had with this committee that really it's not just a policy that you adopt and then it sits on a shelf. It's more of a dynamic document that you will want to review constantly, and in terms of actions and objectives, you'll want to see how we're developing that and implementing it in practice. So I think a lot of those concerns or criticisms that were made as part of the public engagement consultation, I think we'll address as part of the action plan.
Right.
So in terms of the plan, as we've said, unfortunately, because of timescales now, there won't be another meeting of this committee between now and May. But on the basis of the consultation responses so far, what we envisage is that we won't change the draft document that you've seen. And the intention is to present that to council, probably the AGM on the 17th of May, so the new council can formally adopt that going forward. What I would then envisage is that the new Democratic Services Committee after May will have that on the work programme in terms of keeping that plan under review, in terms of how we're implementing that engagement strategy. So that's the plan, Chair, in terms of taking this forward. Do members have any questions on that part of the strategy?
I haven't got any raised hands. Any comments, members? No, I assume we're content. This is a work in progress, and watch your space, as it were.
Right, on petitions, Leanne sent me through some slides yesterday, so I'm going to try and share my screen. We'll see if this works. Can you see that, Chair?
Yes, I can.
In terms of the petition scheme?
Yep, I can see that.
But can members see that?
Yes.
You all
Right.
got it?
Yes, thanks.
Unhappy. In terms of the legislative requirements, obviously the 2021 Act requires the council to have, as part of its engagement strategy, a formal petition scheme, which sets out how petitions can be submitted to the council, and what steps the council will then take in response to those petitions. So that's the legislative requirement. As we discussed at the committee before, obviously the council has a process by which we deal with petitions. It's not documented at the moment, and the outcomes are not sort of reported back to the committee as such. So there's no formal check in terms of how and when we respond. So we do need to formalise what we currently do. We're still awaiting the final guidance in terms of what needs to be in a petition scheme. So we're working a little bit in the dark still in terms of what needs to be included. But based on what was in the draft guidance, then clearly we're going to try and develop something that we can present to council again in May. Based on the draft guidance that we've seen from Welsh Government, there are some minimum requirements that these schemes should include. And the first step is obviously a clear and concise statement in terms of what the petitions are about, and some guidance about how those petitions should be submitted. I mean, clearly there has to be a filtering system in terms of weeding out those vexatious or other petitions that really the council shouldn't deal with. So I think we do need to put some detail in there about the types of petitions that are acceptable and are not acceptable, and some rules, if you like, in terms of validating the lead petitioner and the people who signed those petitions. We've all seen petitions, with various sort of pseudonyms, and Mickey Mouse seems to sign every petition. So we do need to have a process in place for validating names and addresses and contact details, just to make sure that they are bona fide petitions. The other thing is whether you as a council want to specify a minimum number of signatories to any petition, before you would give it any credence or you would respond to it. I know Leanne and her team have done some research amongst other councils in Wales. Some of them have a de minimis level of 20 signatories, so they would expect to have at least 20 people signing a petition before the council would formally respond, and that may be something that you might want to debate later in terms of minimum numbers of signatures. What wouldn't be a valid petition? Well, clearly, with planning and licensing decisions, for example, it's no good submitting a petition calling for the council to reverse a planning or licensing decision. That wouldn't be appropriate. There are statutory appeals processes if people want to challenge planning and licensing decisions. So that wouldn't be appropriate in terms of a petition. Similarly, other appeals procedures such as school admission appeals. Again, there's a statutory process for dealing with those, so we wouldn't deal with those sorts of issues. And similarly, in terms of code of conduct complaints or officer disciplinary complaints, the other side of the coin, any petition that relates to those sorts of individual complaints, we wouldn't deal with as a petition. There may be other circumstances where the council would reject a petition. Some are downright vexatious or offensive or defamatory. I mean, clearly there has to be a rule that those sort of petitions would not be responded to. Again, it's a bit like issues in full council. There are matters of concern to the public that the council has no control over. It's not within the council's decision-making power to address those issues. So again, that is not something that we could accept a valid petition about. Other inappropriate petitions, it's a bit like the council's corporate complaints procedures. There are certain things, whether they relate to personal issues, individual complaints, confidential information relating to other individuals, members of staff, elected members. So essentially private or confidential matters couldn't be the subject of a public petition. We wouldn't expect to deal with anything that is overtly political in terms of the parties or organisations within the council. If it's a matter that the Ombudsman would deal with as a maladministration complaint, then again we probably wouldn't deal with that as a valid petition, or anything that would be referred to a government minister or the Senate. So I think we have to define in the petition scheme the sorts of things that wouldn't constitute a valid petition. But having filtered that down in terms of what is a valid petition, I think we'd like to throw this open for debate, Chair, in terms of giving that process some structure. I mentioned earlier that some councils, some bodies specify a minimum number of signatures for the petition to be accepted. A suggestion is that could be as low as, say, 20 signatures. It could be as high or as low as the council wants to make it. They then talk about progression thresholds. This is about escalating the petition then and how the council responds to those petitions. And what we've seen in other areas is, depending on the number of signatures, there is a process by which those petitions are dealt with. And you know, between say 20 signatures and 100 signatures, those would just be referred to heads of service or cabinet members for an operational or strategic response. But in some councils, and again, we're happy to throw this open for debate and get the views of the committee. In other councils, if you have, say, more than 100 signatures on a petition, they have a process then for actually referring them to scrutiny committees for consideration and for scrutiny to look at it and make recommendations to the executive if they think that any changes need to be considered. So we'd like the committee's views on whether they think that would be appropriate in terms of our petition scheme, that there should be a role for scrutiny committees in addressing some of the petitions where you've got a larger number of signatures. If committee think that scrutiny committee should get involved in the larger petitions, the other question then is, should the petitioners have the right to speak at meetings? Which again relates back to this public engagement and consultation strategy, where part of the objectives of that strategy is to encourage the public to participate more in council debate, council decisions. Well, if scrutiny committee were looking at some of the larger petitions, there is the possibility that the petitioners could be given the right to address those scrutiny committee meetings. So again, we'd like the committee's views on that. And then finally, should we prescribe particular timeframes within which the petition should be dealt with?
Certainly a lot to chew over there. Phil, you've raised your hand.
Thank you, Chair. Gareth, the petition that comes across my desk most often is the one for residents only parking, and I don't think you actually mentioned that. But to follow on from your last remark, I think it's essential that we have a timescale for the petitions to be dealt with. Residents only parking, do you see those falling under this petition scheme or outside it?
If it meets the requirements of a valid petition scheme, then, and it has the sufficient number of signatures, then yeah, I don't see any reason why it couldn't be dealt with under this process.
The only point about sufficient number of signatures, sometimes applications for residents only parking are for a fairly short length of highway. So I'd ask you just to consider that when you put out the guidelines for petitions. Thank you.
Well, it's not for me to consider. Like I said, we'd like the committee's views on this. I think, you know, what we're saying is we can structure a basic petition scheme that includes all of those items. But really, it's for council to decide, and we'd welcome the views of this committee in terms of numbers of signatures for each level of petition. You know, should there be a minimum number of, say, 20 signatures, for example, before you would accept it as a valid petition? Would you discount any petition that had less than, say, 20 signatures? At what level, or what number of signatures do you think that would then need to be escalated, say, for example, to scrutiny committee for a debate? But it's for you to let us know your views on that in terms of numbers. Coming back to the residence parking scheme, say you had more than 20, say you had a de minimis number of 20 signatures. If 20 residents in that road wanted to submit a petition, then yes, that would then be a valid petition. It would then go to the head of service or cabinet member for a decision, and then we would log the receipt of the petition under this scheme, and we would record how and when it was responded to. Now, if you had a much higher level of signatures, say within a whole community who were looking, say, for traffic restrictions within a much broader community, and you had hundreds of signatures, then what I'm saying is that as members, you might think that's more appropriate to debate at scrutiny committee, for example. What you could then do is debate that at scrutiny committee and make recommendations back to the cabinet member for city services. So there are ways of dealing with that. We deal with petitions now. What this scheme does is just formalizes it and gives some more substance, if you like, to the process. But we would like your views as a committee in terms of numbers of signatures, for example, and whether you think that it is appropriate for scrutiny committee to get involved with the larger petitions.
I've got Matthew next.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I mean, just on the residence parking, just as a suggestion, perhaps we could look at a percentage of the street. So if you've got a residence parking thing, you'd need a minimum of, say, 40% of the street to to do it as a percentage rather than having a specific number of people. But I think the important thing is that we do need to engage. We haven't necessarily been particularly good at well, not even knowing what petitions are going into the council at the moment, because we wouldn't know if there's been a petition handed in the altering ward unless we were contacted directly by people. So I guess from that point of view, I think it is important that we look at ways in which they're reported to both members and local representatives. But certainly for larger ones, I think it is important that scrutiny has a role. So if we do have a large petition, that they're allowed to appear in front of scrutiny, and scrutiny can make recommendations, because, as you know, people do get frustrated about trying to deal with the council and their views aren't heard of. And clearly, if you have larger signatures, I don't know what number you would have, and I'd hate to put one. I certainly wouldn't say 20 people, but significant percentage of people, and I think they should have a right to be heard by a scrutiny committee. I think it'd be very helpful and healthy for democracy.
Right, Trevor.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Again, going on numbers, Gareth, I think it depends on what the petition is about. If we're talking about general highways, for instance, throughout the city, then obviously I'd be looking at a larger figure rather than 20. The other thing is those petitions which are inappropriate, shall we say, I think they should, the lead signature should have communication of the reason why it's not being considered. In regards to time scales, in regard to other petitions, yes, I do agree with that. In regards to automatically residents being allowed to go before scrutiny committee, I think that the scrutiny committee should invite them rather than be automatically allowed to go before scrutiny. So if there was a petition on, I don't know, let's say shops within Commercial Street, for instance, the unsightly appearance, then I think that you would have a number of signatures for that, but the lead signature then should be invited by scrutiny, not automatically be required to go to scrutiny, but actually get invited to scrutiny to put the case forward. Not automatically they would appear just because it's a large petition, and that's it. Also, I think after the times, once the time scale has been set, I think feedback should be given to the lead petitioner and also to the local cabinet councillor as such, and obviously the councillor, the cabinet member as well.
Right.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any more comments, gentlemen? And maybe ladies who don't think Carmel has joined us in it. So yeah. So any more comments, gents? Are we all done? No. Well, I think that's a fair airing. I think at the moment we do definitely need to have some sort of form of policy, and I think it's really the council's a little bit vulnerable in as much that there isn't a policy on this, and it's obviously something we're beholden to sort out.
Right, just to clarify then, Chair, in terms of the process, the intention now will be to develop something that we can present to council, probably again at the AGM on the 17th of May, to adopt this going forward. Like I said, the petition scheme is really an integral part of the public engagement and consultation strategy. So based on the comments that we've received, we'll go and sort of flesh something out that we think we can then present as a as a policy, a draft policy to council at the AGM on the 17th of May. And it may well be that the council decides that it's something that they would want Democratic Services Committee to keep under review anyway, a bit like the consultation strategy. Because it might be trial and error, for example, with a petition scheme, that we will try it and we'll find it does need improvement or refinement because of issues that might arise in practice. So what I get is that there is a general consensus that at some level scrutiny should get involved. That there should be a facility for public speaking at scrutiny, but taking on board Councillor Watkins' point, he seems to think that should be the discretion of the chair of scrutiny rather than an automatic right for every lead petitioner to speak at every scrutiny committee. The view there seemed to be that it should be left to the discretion of the chairs. And of course, scrutiny committees have that discretion now in terms of engaging with the public. They can invite members of the public to attend their meetings anyway. So it might well be that we can just cross-refer to that scrutiny policy on that one. But I get the consensus there is a feeling that subject to the chair being happy, that there should be a role for scrutiny committees, but only in relation to the larger types of petitions, not the smaller types of petitions. So we'll have to look at putting some numbers against that. From what I hear, I think ward councillors need to be informed or engaged in the process. So whether that goes then a smaller petition that goes to cabinet member or whether something goes to scrutiny committee, if it's ward specific, you would expect the ward members to at least be informed and invited for their views, so we can build that into the scheme. In terms of presentation of the petitions, what we envisage is we'll develop a draft type of petition, if you like, that people can use if they want to submit something in hard copy. Yeah. And either the petitions themselves or the online petitions will be submitted via Democratic Services. A bit like questions and other things in council, we will then take a view at monitoring officer and head of Democratic Services level whether we think that's an appropriate petition in terms of the guidance and the rules, and if it is, we will then sort of escalate it in line with the process. So I think, you know, that in essence is the bare bones of your petition scheme, and we'll take away those comments now and we'll work on a first draft. And like I said, the intention will be then to present something to council at AGM on the 17th of May as part of the wider public participation strategy. So I hope that, you know, that's addressed some of the issues that were raised previously. And I know Councillor Evans has asked for this, for the options to be highlighted and discussed. So I hope that covers the range of options and the sorts of things that we need to include, Chair.
Yeah, I could go along with all of that, Gareth. I think the impression I've got is that one size doesn't necessarily fit all, and I mean maybe the idea of a percentage rather than actual numbers should be taken into consideration.
One thing I would say, Chair, I know, you know, we've talked about residence parking, we've talked about other types of petitions, highways, for example. I think there's a danger of making this too prescriptive or too complicated. What we don't want is to have, you know, particular percentages or requirements for particular types of petitions. I think that's overcomplicating matters. So I think we need one set of ground rules for all types of petitions, but maybe build in an element of discretion in terms of what happens, say, at the scrutiny committees, for example. So yes, I would be reluctant to put a specific number for petitions, for example, in relation to residence parking. I think that's too complicated then. I think we treat all petitions in the same way. And I think you sort of assess their importance or how they're dealt with in terms of the number of signatories that you get on the online or the hard copy petition. So that would be my preference going forward. I wouldn't want to make it too complicated.
Okay, I've got Matthew and then I've got Phil.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that could be a matter of debate. I was merely suggesting that if you had 10% of residents wanted resident parking and the vast majority didn't, you're just wasting officer time and everything else. And at the moment, if you did have an opportunity to make a request for resident parking, and when we used to have those surveys, if there was only a certain percentage who didn't respond, then it wouldn't go ahead. So it was just purely from a point of view of officer time and things like that. From a, you know, somebody, Mr. Jones might not like the council, and it's his 5th time of trying to set a petition off, and his petition this time is, you know, I'm the one on the street who wants resident parking, and I've got to drive and nobody else to. I think so. I'd just like to raise a broader point of questioning why it's coming to the AGM, because you have a new council. I didn't know who's going to be here. I thought the AGM was supposed to be a sort of formal, and whoever's there, potentially with a lot of new councillors, they're going to be burdened with huge amounts of information. We said we still only got the draft from the Welsh Government, and I'm just wondering why it doesn't come back to the committee in June, because you'll have a lot of new members, whoever's there, and it could be an opportunity for people to make political statements at what essentially is supposed to be, you know, a mayor making occasion, and that's why we wanted to separate it from. There's a question, so.
Right, just to answer the broader question first in terms of process, I agree with Councillor Evans, it's not ideal. And yes, I would expect both the participation strategy and the petition scheme to be on the work programme for democratic services going forward. So I think you will continue to look at it and continue to refine it. The reason that we've got to take it to the AGM is, by law, the new council has to have a petition scheme in place. In the same way it has to have a public participation strategy in place. And therefore we have to take it to the AGM to get a petition scheme adopted, albeit one that will then be looked at and refined by Democratic Services Committee. So unfortunately, in terms of due process, we have to have something in place come the AGM in May. And yes, although we don't like to conduct a lot of business at the AGM, I think because this is the first AGM following the election, and also in the light of the legislation, there are certain things the new council has to adopt, that unfortunately it will be inevitable that we'll have a number of housekeeping matters that we'll have to pick up and deal with at that AGM. So yes, not ideal, but we don't have a full council meeting now between now and the next council meeting on the 17th of May. So that's the earliest opportunity that we can take these matters to full council.
I can appreciate that, Gareth, but as far as I was aware, you still need received a draft guidance from the Welsh Government. So I would have thought that if you haven't received the full guidance, we shouldn't be making decisions on the back of draft legislation.
But it's not draft legislation, it's draft guidance. The legislation is in place, and the legislation requires the council to have a petition scheme adopted as soon as the new council is formed. And the earliest you can do that is in May. So
when
yeah, basically we've tried guidance. Sorry?
Do we know when we're expecting the final guidance? You said
that won't be until June. Well, we know the consultation period doesn't end until 22nd of May. So we don't expect any guidance until June. So again, it's not ideal. We have to adopt the basic scheme that meets the requirements of the legislation, and then I would expect Democratic Services then to review the detail of those schemes in the light of the guidance once that's finalised. So not ideal, but legally we have to have something adopted by council on the 17th of May just to comply with the legislation.
Okay, thanks, Gareth.
Bill. Thank you, Chair. My concern now, after listening to Gareth quite carefully, is that this is becoming overly bureaucratic, and I'm sure that our articulate and verbose residents will have no difficulty at all in coming to committee and expressing their views. But what are we going to do to comply with our duties under the handicapped and disabled guidelines? You know, how are we going to give support to some of our residents were not able to express themselves so clearly. And I think it's something that the committee should consider. And what support are we going to offer for people who have mental health problems or whatever? Could I leave that with you, Chair?
Oh, yes, certainly a point to be considered.
I think it's a much broader issue, Chair. Like I said, what we're dealing with here is a process for dealing with petitions. I think once we get to the stage where people are being invited to make representations to any committee, then we look at the equalities issues in terms of how and when they make those representations. So that's a much broader issue that probably falls outside the narrow petition scheme, and is something that we need to address probably in terms of our equalities and well-being duties anyway, in terms of public attendance. So we can pick that up separately, just to assure Councillor Horain about that. Obviously, we would pick that up separately. Also, I mean, post-May, we're talking about hybrid meetings anyway, so people who maybe are digitally excluded, who can't dial in remotely, we'd have to have a facility for them to come into the meeting for a face-to-face meeting. All of those issues we can address separately as part of the broader participation strategy. But I think the petition scheme, we need to keep it relatively simple and straightforward in terms of how we deal with those issues. So there's one further point in terms of what Councillor Evans was saying, and we'll write it into the petition scheme. The idea of a petition is that it's really, you've exhausted other avenues first. So with residence parking, for example, we wouldn't expect somebody just to submit a petition saying we want a residence parking scheme. We would expect people to submit an application in the usual way to the head of city services, and it would be dealt with in the usual way. We'd also expect them to exhaust all avenues before submitting a petition. So a petition is not as a first resort, it's very much a last resort in terms of any issues or matters that they want the council to consider. So yeah, I wouldn't see it being that onerous, because if you didn't get the necessary number of people in the street to support a residence parking order, then a petition is not going to overturn that.
Right.
If I might, Chair, then, so
Okay,
could we see a footnote at the bottom of the petition scheme drawing potential petitioners to our equalities points, so if they do need assistance, they know where to go?
Yeah, I'm sure we could do that, Chair. We will be giving assistance to petitioners, particularly lead petitioners anyway, in terms of how they process these matters. So I'm sure we can have a link there in terms of accessibility and the equalities measures that we've got in place.
Thank you, Gareth.
right. I think that brings us on to number 5, which is the independent remuneration panel report. This, I believe, is for information only. Purely
for information, Chair. But again, coming back to what Councillor Evans was just saying about the AGM, this is the final report now. There are no changes, significant changes, since the draft report that we took to you back in November. So in terms of the proposed allowances post-May, the basic allowances and the resetting of the senior salaries, they remain as they were in the draft report. But what the council now has to do, or will have to do on the 17th of May, is adopt a members' allowance scheme based on these revised salaries. So again, in terms of housekeeping matters, we will need to take a report to the AGM in May. So at the first council meeting in May, the new council formally adopts a scheme of members' allowances based on these new senior salaries. And once that AGM has then made appointments in terms of the leader of council, cabinet members, chairs of committees, then in terms of our published member scheme of allowances, we can put names against the schedule of members who will be receiving the senior salaries. So we can we can complete that scheme then. But at the moment, this is just for your information, to confirm that the IRP have issued their final report and prescribed the allowances post-May, and just to flag up that at the AGM on the 17th of May, the new council will need to adopt a new scheme of member allowances.
Any comments, committee? No, I think we're all content on that. The only comment I've got, it will be a terrible time to lose an election just when we get a pay rise, eh? There we are.
Going to be busy on May the 17th.
Well,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Councillor Watkins is right. Normally we just deal with appointments at the AGM, but there'll be a lot of constitutional matters that we will need to pick up, because that will be the first council meeting of a new term, and since the new legislation will have taken effect.
That's right.
Okay, so where are we now? The new officer scheme of delegation, which again is for information only.
Yeah, this is very much work in progress. I mean, it's something that Liz has been working on. As members are aware, obviously we've been through a new senior management restructure, with services being realigned now under different heads of service. So what we need to do between now and again, the council meeting on the 17th of May, is to amend the officer scheme of delegation, just to make sure that the right delegated powers sit with the right head of service. So this is Liz's sort of first stab at this, if you like, in terms of the new senior management structure, and where the new scheme of delegation will sit within that structure. So it's work in progress. The idea is that we're going to refine and finalize this. We're not going to change anything. So the delegation remains as is. So what the council has delegated to officers, that will remain, but it'll just mean a different head of service, for example, will be exercising those powers post-May. For example, in my area or previous area, when public protection came under me as law and regulation, all of the delegated powers in terms of taxi licensing at officer level, and all of the environmental health training standards delegations were in my name. Now, obviously, because public protection has now moved to the head of environment and public protection, those delegated powers will now vest in her. So what we're doing now, and it's a major sort of overhaul of the scheme of delegation, is making sure that the right officer delegation sits within the right service area. And it's a bit more complicated than it actually looks, because obviously we've created about 3 or 4 new service areas, and therefore we're having to sort of disaggregate some of the services and the decision making, and make sure that sits at the right level. So, you know, Liz has done a lot of work on this, and you know, I want to pay credit to the work that she's done on this. But yeah, it's very much a work in progress. The intention is that we'll finalise it between now and May, and unfortunately, yes, this will be added to the list of things that council will need to sign off on the 17th of May. So it's just for information, Chair, but I'm happy to pick up, or Liz will be happy to pick up any questions if members have any points they want to raise.
Trevor?
Yeah, only one, Chair. How will that affect scrutiny committees then, Gavin? Do we know, will it change, or?
This is purely officer scheme of delegation. So these are the decisions that are taken at officer level. They don't get anywhere near members, and they don't go to committee. Now, as far as scrutiny committees are concerned, a lot will depend again on what the makeup of the new council, I would suggest. We're also talking to Tracy McKim and Paul Flint in terms of performance management, and the grouping of services within scrutiny committees. So, you know, for example, we've got 3, but the 2 main performance scrutiny committees, they're grouped according to directorates at the moment. Now, those directorates will change.
Yeah.
You know, we've got effectively 4 corporate directors now, if you count the chief executive, for example, and the groupings are different in terms of we don't have sort of place and people anymore. So we will need to look at that with the chairs of scrutiny and reallocate some of the service plans, for example. Again, that's a much bigger piece of work that we're looking at the moment in terms of that new performance self-assessment process that we have to go through. So yeah, looking at scrutiny terms of reference, excuse me, is a much bigger piece of work.
Yeah. Okay, Gareth, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any more? I think that's I think that's it. I did notice on page 33, I think it's the responsibilities of the Officer for Regeneration, point 3.7 sub point 3, whether to make bids for European funding. I take it that's a thing of the past now, huh?
Yeah, well, again, we can tidy that up. But yeah, maybe we just take out the reference to European funding, and what it's designed to cover is external grant funding. So we're assuming that will be replaced by levelling up fund and internal grant funding. So yeah, we can pick up that as part of the refinement. There are other things I think we've asked heads of service to look at, you know, in terms of fine tuning this. Like I said, it's work in progress. The other thing with planning, for example, all planning applications in relation to council-owned property currently go to planning committee, but the reason for that is that property and assets, corporate property and assets, used to sit under the head of regeneration, investment and housing. So there was a conflict there where the head of that service was almost determining under delegation their own planning applications. That will change. Property and assets will now move into people in transformation. And because of that, then we might need to tweak that delegation. I think the idea now is that small applications in relation to council property can therefore be determined by the head of development control, for example. So there'll be a bit of fine tuning there. But again, it's just to reflect the fact that property and asset service now sits in a different head of service. So there'll be a bit of fine tuning in those areas that we need to do just to make this fit for purpose.
Thank you. Phil.
Just a very minor point, Chair. This European funding, it's my understanding that some of the scientific and academic communities are still eligible for some European funding. I can't imagine which ways it's going to impact on the council, but it's something that needs to be checked just in case there's new wording needing to be put in rather than totally withdrawing it. Thank you, Chair.
Well, the idea, Chair, is I mean, this is a scheme of delegation. Again, we don't want to make it too prescriptive. So, you know, what I'd be inclined to do, and I'll talk to Liz about this, is just delete all reference to European. This is about grant funding, external grant funding from whatever source. And Councillor Horain may be right. You know, we may have come out the European Union, the Economic Union, but there may be other European grant that still filters through. So we don't want to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater there. So what we'll do is just take the reference out to European in that and you know, make it apply to all external grant funding.
Easily done. Any more for any more? I think we're all done on this one. Yeah. Okay. Now, point 7 is the presiding member / chair of council update. That's pages 43 to 50. What news?
Well, we were just conscious of the fact that the council had taken a decision that we will have a presiding member chair of council come May, and this will be the first item that will be voted on at the AGM in May. So rather than sort of go in cold, we felt that we'd bring this report back to this committee more for information, if you like, in terms of how the process will work, and what that decision by council will now mean. So yeah, we've produced this written report that gives you a little bit more information, if you like, about how the process will work in practice. And we've also given you a revised sort of role description for the presiding member and the chair of council role and the vice chair in terms of that. Obviously, in terms of the appointment process itself, I know there's a graph in the report that shows you how many councils in Wales now have got a presiding member. I think, you know, almost 76% have gone down this route. Look, but councillors already taken that decision. The point is that legally the appointment of the presiding member, the chair of council, is a matter for full council. So, you know, there's nothing that we can do to avoid that. This will be the first item on the agenda for the AGM, and council will vote on the nomination and the appointment of the presiding member and the deputy presiding member. And it will, again, as all appointments, be done on a simple majority of votes cast. So that's the legal requirement. Unlike the mayor, the chair of council or presiding member role, although it's up for review every year, there is nothing to prevent the chair of council being re-elected. And as we've discussed before, in terms of chairing skills and continuity, there may well be some merit in the same person continuing, you know, to chair the council for a number of years, provided they continue to be prepared to act in that capacity. In terms of how they chair council, again, we've reflected that in the role description. As with the mayor, it should continue to be chaired in an apolitical, neutral manner. The fact that it's a presiding member or chair as opposed to the mayor shouldn't make any difference to that level of political neutrality in terms of how the meetings are being chaired. And the other thing that we've suggested in terms of the role description, I know it's something we've mentioned to this committee previously, is that in addition to chairing council meetings, the presiding member should also chair any all-member seminars, training and development seminars that are hosted in the council chamber. So he or she should do that. And we also think that it's more appropriate for that person to discharge other types of administrative functions that are currently delegated to the mayor, the one being the family absences authorisation. Now, it's never been called on, simply because the 6 months rule allows members to be absent for 6 months without reason anyway. But there are regulations in place where members can ask for absence due to family circumstances to be authorised, and there's a role in that for what was previously the mayor. Now we're thinking that really that should now be the chair of council that should discharge that responsibility, because the idea is that the mayor will purely be a civic office. They won't discharge any constitutional or any governance issues. They will simply represent the council as the first citizen in terms of external and internal events. So it clearly makes that distinction between the governance role of the chair and the constitutional role and the civic ceremonial role of the mayor. So we've tweaked the job descriptions, the role descriptors to actually to reflect that. The one thing I did say here, and it's something that when we were looking at other councils' practices that did come up, it wasn't something that was written into constitutions, but it was a sort of an unwritten rule or custom and practice by agreement by the different groups or parties on the council, that if the presiding member was appointed from one particular group, for example, that the deputy presiding officer would be nominated by one of the other groups. Like I said, it's purely an informal arrangement, custom and practice, but it's something that the groups on the council post may might want to consider. But constitutionally, legally, both the chair of council, presiding member, and the deputy roles are both agreed, voted on, and determined by full council at the AGM. So I just hope that's given you a little bit more information about process, Chair. But I'm happy to pick up any questions that members may have.
Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. And you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to go back through the debates we've already had on a couple of occasions at this committee and the council. Although I do feel sorry for new councillors who'll be attending their first AGM, which could go on for several hours, depending on the outcome of the council elections in May. Just a point of clarification, Gareth, excuse me if I missed it. Would the presiding member, chair of the council, have a casting vote?
Yes. I've flagged in the report that we will need to make amendments to council standing orders and other parts of the constitution as a consequence of these changes. But yes, the presiding member would have the same rights as the mayor. And legally, under the Local Government Act, the person chairing the meetings will have a second and casting vote.
So if there was a home council, it could be pretty critical, but that's just a point, an observation. So I'll leave it like that. Thank you, Chair.
But it would be exactly the same for the mayor.
Except the mayor changes every year, so I guess you're so. Yeah. Thank you.
Any more comments on this, gentlemen? No. Just by the by, Gareth, so on the day, David Williams will open the meeting as mayor and then hand over to this new person.
That's assuming, of course, David is re-elected. But yeah. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that the Councillor Williams is re-elected. Then yes, he would open the AGM, and the first item on the agenda would be nominations for the appointment of the chair of council, presiding member, and we would deal with that as the first item. And when the new chair, presiding member, is appointed, he or she will then take the chair for the rest of the AGM. We will then complete the AGM agenda with all of these governance constitutional issues that we flagged up. So new member scheme of allowances, new officer scheme of delegation, participation engagement strategy, for example. There may be issues about the composition of governance and audit committee, depending upon the composition of the council. So we'll have to look at other housekeeping issues that might need to be addressed at the AGM, but we would then go through that AGM process. At the end of the AGM, we would then adjourn, and then we would have a separate mayor making process then to install the new civic mayor.
With this new system of a speaker, it would be conceivable that there could be sort of elections within different parties. Vote for me, I'd be the best speaker, or whatever.
I couldn't possibly comment in terms of what goes on within political groups. All I know is that nominations will be received in council. If there are more than one, if there's more than one nomination, there will be a vote, and the appointment will be on who gets the most votes. But how it works within groups, that's I say that's a no concern to me.
That could be great fun. There we go. Right. Well, I think that's more or less it until it's just the date of the next meeting. I think I've got it down as the 16th of June at 10 o'clock. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct, Chair.
Well, I think that leaves me only to thank all the officers for the hard work they've done in bringing these issues before us, and I'd like to thank all the committee members for their contribution and support of the committee, and apolitically, I'm going to wish everybody the best of luck in the elections. Hope to see you all later on in the year. Good luck,
Chair.
boys.
Chair,
Yeah.
could I just apologise?
Oh, sorry, I've seen you. Yeah. Ladies and boys.
Could I just apologise for my late arrival at this meeting as well? I do apologise. Thank you.
Okay. Well, glad you made it in at last. Good to hear from you, and good luck to you as well, Carmel. All the best then, and let's see how things pan out. All the best. Bye bye then.
Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Right.